Greetings students. Today, before beginning the class, I would like to show you some pictures. This being the first one. So, this is a rice field. Next one, what do you see here? Obviously a forest. This one is a lake. Then a desert, and then mountain tops, and then a vast ocean. So can you tell me, why did I show you these pictures, or what is common between these pictures, between this ocean and the mountain top, or between the desert and the lake, or between this forest and the rice field? Or what is the factor that binds all of these together? Well, that we will learn today. So, all these places can be called ecosystems. Now, what is an ecosystem? The term ecosystem was literally derived from the Greek word oikos, which means the house. So, does that mean that these places, they resemble houses? Well, in a certain way, yes. A house can be called as a dwelling place where the inhabitants live together, interact with each other, and also with the physical environment of the house. Isn't it? So, that is what ecosystem is. So, if I want to define ecosystem, I will call it as a self-contained area, which is composed of different organisms living in it. And not just living in it, but interacting with each other. And not just interacting with each other, interacting with the physical environment as well. Physical environment such as sunlight, air, water, soil, even the climatic factors like the temperature, rainfall. So, when we get to see a place like that, which has different organisms living and interacting with each other, and the physical features, with the physical factors of that place, we call it an ecosystem. So now let us look at this picture again. Look at these rice fields, the plants, the bugs, the microorganisms in the soil, the birds nesting around. All these living organisms, they depend on each other, they live off each other, isn't it? So this rice field can be called as an ecosystem. Now look at this forest, the tall trees, the grasses, then there are shrubs, bushes, then there are so many wild animals, birds. All of them, they live with each other, they interact with each other, they depend upon the forest, they depend upon the physical environmental factors of the forest, isn't it? So, forest can also be called an ecosystem. Look at the lake, the fishes, the algae, the birds, everything living here. They depend on the lake. They depend on each other for their survival. So I can call the lake also as an ecosystem. Same goes with the desert. The desert rat, the snakes, it's not shown in the picture, but the cactus that will be growing there, some desert plants that are growing there, They all live in this place and they are all fit to live in this place. And they interact with the conditions of this place. So this also can be an ecosystem. Mountains, look at the majestic mountains, everything that lives here. Everything. Similarly, in the oceans, deep inside the oceans, there is such a vast world. So each of these pictures are ecosystems. So I hope this is clear that what is an ecosystem, and I hope showing the pictures was helpful. Now, to understand ecosystem better, getting to know ecosystem, we will learn about one particular ecosystem. So this is how we start our chapter, ecosystem. Now, the ecosystem that we will learn about is a forest ecosystem. Now, you just saw a picture of a forest. Let me show you another picture of a forest given in your book. Look at this one. Okay. So, what is basically a forest? It's a large area of land which has dense growth of trees, and not just trees, it has shrubs, it has bushes, it has grasses, so many varieties of plant life. It also has animals. Now, all these plants, they produce their own food through photosynthesis, that we know. We've been studying about it since your childhood. And that's why, as they all can produce their own food, they are called autotrophs. Auto means by self, trop means food. So who can produce food by themselves. Okay? Now, the forests also have animals, which can be divided into many groups. We know that there are many kinds of animals. Now, one thing when we are discussing about an ecosystem has to be kept in mind is that the interaction between the various living factors are mostly food related. Food is the most important thing needed to survive. So the interaction between the organisms in an ecosystem is mostly food related, and how they depend on each other. So if we look at animals and classify them on the basis of their food habitats, then the first group of animals that we will talk about are plant-eating animals. So what are the plant-eating animals? Deer, rabbits, grasshoppers, so many birds like pigeons, sparrows, then insects like bees, butterflies, crickets, grasshoppers. So they all depend upon plants directly for their food. So all such animals, they are categorized under the group primary consumers. Okay, because they are direct plant eaters. They directly eat the plants. So that's why we call them primary consumers. Okay. Now, from these animals, let us move a bit and look at tiger, lion, wolf, snakes, lizards. So these animals, when we look at these animals, they are what? They eat herbivores, isn't it? They eat their flesh. They hunt them, they capture them, and they eat their flesh. Such animals are categorized as secondary consumers. We earlier used to know them as carnivores, but for ecosystem, as I named the herbivores as primary consumers, we will call them as secondary consumers. Now, this thing of secondary consumers does not mean that always a tiger or a big carnivore needs to be a secondary consumer. Let us look at the small insects or the smaller animals. For example, a grasshopper. A grasshopper directly depends on the plants. So a grasshopper will be primary consumer. But if we think about a frog, not a very big animal, but frog eats grasshopper. So the animal which feeds upon primary consumer, I can call them secondary consumers. So frog is a secondary consumer, isn't it? So that's how we keep looking forward to variety of animals. Now let us think about an animal that eats frog. For example, a snake. Snake eats a frog. So snake can be called a tertiary consumer, isn't it? Now, what eats snake? A large bird like peacock. So the peacocks are a higher level of food level. So now, by saying all this, you can understand that I am dividing the animals into different types of food levels. The one who directly depend on plant are the primary ones, primary consumers. Then comes secondary consumers who depend upon primary consumers, who eat primary consumers. Then comes tertiary consumer, which eats secondary consumer, and so on and so forth. It will keep on moving. So this chain-like thing which is moving, which depicts all the different animals as different food levels, is known as a food chain, where each level or each type of organism will be called a trophic level. Okay? Now, let us think about the topmost predator, which can eat the mightiest of the animal. So that will be on the ultimate level, that will be on the top. But is that the end of the food chain, or is that the topmost trophic level? No, it is not. Because all these animals who belong to different trophic levels, due to one reason or the other reason, they die. Now, if the body of the dead is not eaten by scavengers, it will spoil the ecosystem, isn't it? So, even if, for example, let us think about vultures. A vulture will never be able to hunt and kill a lion, but a dead lion will be eaten up by vultures, by crows. So these animals which feed upon the dead, the flesh, the putrefying flesh, the decaying flesh of the dead, are called scavengers. Now, there are some parts that even the scavengers leave. They don't eat that. For example, the bones, and maybe they are full, so they left a bit of the tail, left a bit of the hair. So what happens to those? They are also broken down. Nothing is left as it is. Those dead materials are broken down by the bacteria and fungi in the soil. So that means whatever was the animal made of, all the nutrient, all the elements that the animal was made of, returns back to the soil. And who uses those elements? Who uses those nutrients? Plants. So can you figure out this cycle which started with plants getting eaten by primary consumers, and the topmost level of food chain dying, returning to the soil, becoming the food of the plants. So this is a cycle of food. This is a cycle of food where every organism present in an ecosystem is interacting with the other organism, isn't it? So without their interaction, the ecosystem wouldn't have been in place, wouldn't have been existing. So if I consider only forest, or if I consider any ecosystem and look at the type of food that is getting passed on from one level to another, the chain appears like this. Producers, to primary consumers, to secondary consumers, to tertiary consumers. There can be more levels based on the organisms living there. But all of them, all these animals, where do they end up? They end up being dead, food for the scavengers, and they end up as nutrients in the soil. Okay? So that's what life in an ecosystem is all about. So next day we will learn about the components of ecosystem. This was a general overview of an ecosystem. Next day we will learn about ecosystem in detail by dividing them into various components and learning about how the components interact with each other in detail. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you everyone.